Welcome folks, in today's video we're taking a first hands-on look at Nikon's first foray into cine lenses with a lens that technically isn't a cine lens. Go figure. Greetings folks. As a decade-and-a-half long Nikon still shooter, it's been interesting to see over the past 4 or 5 years their move to include more and more video features. Arguably the Z9 is one of the best featured video cameras on the market, even though it's also one of the best stills cameras on the market. So you would know back in 2024 they purchased Red, the video company, so we expected a lot of things to happen in that space. And then in October last year they announced the development of the 28-135 PZ lens, which is a power zoom cine lens, their first ever of that kind of lens. And here it is. It's so strikingly similar to the Sony version, which is also a 28-135 f4 lens. To me, the dimensions, I've used it before, but I don't have them side by side. They seem so similar. One big difference though is the Sony one actually came out 10 years ago. Before they really even had a full frame video camera on the market, they had the full frame lens. That guy still sells for $2,500, and I don't have exact pricing on this one, but I hear it's going to be in that ballpark, maybe a couple of $100 more expensive. But you would expect we're going to see really great image quality, seeing it's got the latest and greatest 2025 tech in there. Why would you want a PZ lens, a power zoom lens? If you've ever tried doing smooth zooms manually on a lens that isn't designed for it, it's almost impossible. It's actually one of the reasons why I like to shoot 8K video, because then in post we can add a nice slow zoom into the shot and retain full 4K quality. This will let you move this little dial here to activate the zoom, which gives you a smoother result, but it's also got a little toggle on the side which you can push up or down, which will give you the smoothest results. In this video we're basically going to check it out, see what features it adds in terms of interfacing with the cameras, give you a look at the image quality, and talk you through what this might be suitable for. So one thing that kind of surprised me with this guy is that Nikon don't have a 28-135 lens in the system. So often when companies develop a cine lens, they'll start out with a stills lens and then just rebuild the body so it's geared, and if it needs power zoom, whatever, but then they already have the optics in place. I hope that that means that they've designed this from the ground up to minimize things like focus breathing. But it's just kind of curious that they go for exactly a 28-135 f4 when that's what Sony has. The closest I could find in the Nikon range is this guy. Not this guy, this is the 35-1.2. Watch this space, we have a video coming on that soon. This guy, the 24-120, and it is an f4, it is an S lens. I'm guessing they didn't go with this because it extends to zoom and this one doesn't, but seeing it's all inside such a long body, pretty much still could fit there. But it could just be, you know, it's like Y50s. There's something about that focal length that's a sweet spot that so many brands can bring out high quality 51.8s that used to be small and inexpensive before we got to mirrorless. Maybe there's just something about this focus range that works, or maybe they just wanted to fit in with what is kind of the industry standard, thanks to Sony with their one on the market, that this matches. But you know, 10 years later, if they had wanted to go to say 24-135 or 28-150 or a slightly faster aperture, then that would have been welcome. The other slightly interesting thing as a cine lens is that this, as far as I can see, is still listed as an f-stop rather than a t-stop, which you would typically find on a cine lens. Just speaking to my technical expert off camera, so technically this is not a video lens, it is a stills lens. Despite being so clearly aimed at videography, the fact that it's rated as an f4, not a T something, means that it is technically a stills lens. If you don't know the difference, It's essentially F measures the amount of light that comes into the lens, T measures the amount of light that comes out of the lens. Videographers, that's really important. So if you're switching lenses, like you might get a 35, a 50, and an 85 that are all f1.2, but they may actually be like a T1.5, 1.6, 1.7 for the amount of light that comes through. For video, it's really important that if you change your lenses, your exposure is going to stay the same, because you don't want to be changing your frame rate or anything like that. It's going to screw up the look of your video. So this is an f4, not a T value lens. Now, I just became aware of a little rumor that makes the decision to designate this as an f-stop lens, not a t-stop lens, even more intriguing. Rumor has it that as you're watching this, when this lens has been formally announced, there's going to also be announced a new red camera with a Z mount that will make use of all of these functions and let you use all of your Z lenses. Really interesting. If that's true, why didn't they go with the T-stop? I'm actually going to be going to Japan at the end of this month to attend CP Plus, and I'm hoping to visit the new Nikon headquarters, show you guys around, meet with a Nikon rep, and ask them all kinds of questions about the Nikon Z system. So if you have any questions you'd like me to put to them, please leave it as a comment below or message me, and I'll do my best to give you a really interesting insight into what Nikon have planned for us Z users. It's easy to forget, to be honest, that this camera, the Z9, has actually been out for 3 and a bit years, released Christmas 2021, and it was in 2022 that they released firmware version 2.0 that it sounds hyperbolic, but really it could have been a whole second camera. When all these rumors are flying around about a Z9 Mark II coming out and is it incremental or whatnot, if you compare the Z9 that was released in 2021 to what we have now, they're basically a different camera anyway. That one update added so many things, including 4K 60 RAW, sorry, 8K 60 RAW, and a whole host of other features. And they brought in the MCN10 grip that you can use for controlling video cameras that kind of foreshadowed that this was coming. I gotta say, I've gotten great results and made my living with Z9s for 3 years now, but now that I have a giant lens with a matte box, I truly feel like a professional. But it's 2025, so if I'm gonna be professional, let's put this into vertical mode for my TikTok and my Instagram and whatnot. It's pretty nice, I gotta say. The build quality, it's just what you would expect for this kind of a price. If you're in the world of cinema, honestly, $2,500 to $3,000 for a lens is not expensive. For mirrorless cameras, it's kind of what you would expect from Nikon, but it's not overly expensive. I wouldn't have been surprised if this actually came in more expensive. Using it kind of really brings it to light when you do compare doing the power zoom dial versus using the toggle on the side here, for how smooth it can be. Now, of course, this is all customizable of how fast it's going to move and if it's linear or not, that kind of thing. But maybe my favorite thing about this, one of the firmware updates for the Z9 brought in a high-res zoom option. Because this is an 8K sensor, even when I'm doing the top ProRes formats in 4K or any of the other 4K formats, I can enable high-res zoom, which lets me digitally do a 2x zoom in camera with no loss of quality. And again, you can customize that to different buttons on the camera, but you can also link it into the functions of this lens. So you can have it on and kind of just mixed in, or as an extension. So going in and turning it on as an extension, you then see that as you're zooming in, you see on the left there PZ, and when it gets to 135, then it switches over to HR, which is the high-res zoom, which then gets you all the way through to 270, which basically makes this a 9.5 times zoom, not all optical, but all with no loss of quality. So pretty cool stuff. One thing you have to keep in mind, that high-res zoom, whether you're using it with this lens or anything, it does disable your different autofocus modes. You're limited to using the large central box. You can still select your different subjects, but it doesn't show you the box around the face. So I don't know why, to be honest. Maybe it's a processor thing, that if it's using a high video format and doing a digital zoom, it just doesn't have the bandwidth to autofocus and show you the autofocus points. I don't know, but that's just always been the case. So it's working. I can see that it's getting people in focus. I just don't get the box. So Now, I am required to tell you that this is a pre-production lens, this isn't final, and I'm only shooting with it for the afternoon, so only consider this a first hands-on. Let me know what you'd like to see tested in future. Oh, excuse me, what? What do you mean that's not necessary? Shut up, I just did it. Don't be jealous. So look, this is clearly a video lens. It's not the kind that you're likely to be hanging off your side. But if you saw my recent video where I talked about the 70-200 where the foot fell off, when you have a combo like this, we do still kind of routinely carry them like this if it's not on a tripod. So just beware, I don't think it's exactly the same mount as on the 70-200, but it does look like it's using just as small screws there. The last thing you'd want is your brand new $2,600 lens and your $6,000 camera to fall to the floor. So let's do a little three-way comparison here. First of all, I'm going to go in on this flower, so I'm going to go using the toggle here, which should be the smoothest. So I'm just holding it up lightly, and we're about to cross over into the power zoom, and boom, there we are. So super nice and smooth. And coming out, if I hold it really lightly, it zooms out really, really slowly and naturally. Again, this is all things that you can customize, or if I pull it all the way down, then it zooms out really quickly. Now I can also do it with this ring, which if you do it smoothly, you can see it's still not, definitely not as smooth as if I were using the toggle there. But because this is geared, you could have it, linked up to a system, so then you use that instead. That's certainly an option. But let's just compare how it is if you're using, the 24-120 and trying to do that by hand. So you'll see, because this lens doesn't have any of those features, the high-res zoom isn't integrated. So I've got it set up to be my function 1 and 2 buttons on the camera. If you are a Z shooter and you're not sure of all the features on your camera, check out my expert setup guide. It takes you through Z9, Z8, all of the APS-C cameras, all the full-frame ones, and every single function that they're capable of doing, so you can get the most out of it. So essentially on this one, I'm going to use the zoom ring to do the main zoom, and then use the high-res zoom button to zoom the last part. So if we start in close with a 2-time high-res zoom, that's going to be 240 as opposed to 270 on the other camera. We can see we've got the bee flying around the flower there. So I can zoom out super smooth because that's high-res zoom. And then from there, now I'm going to legit try to do this as smooth as possible. So that actually, by my standard, is not too bad. If you have a lens that's a little bit old or got a bit of grit in there, it's so hard to do a really smooth turn. You need to have the right amount of resistance, not too much, not too little, to get something smooth happening. And that's about as good as I could do on any lens. If I were doing it on the 24-70 or something, I never get it quite this smooth. But if we put them side by side, you can see it's just not the same as using the power zoom option. It's kind of, I always feel bad criticizing a feature that others don't offer when in 9 out of 10 ways it's good, but in some ways it has a downside. But that's what you do in a balanced review, I guess. The power zoom, I'm so glad that the cameras offer it, but the limitation of having your autofocus mode locked really is an issue. So I don't have an option here of what subject to use, so I just have it turned off. I'm shooting a flower, there isn't a mode for that. So when I'm in nice and close on this, then it's got my flower, I have it right in the center of my frame, great. Then as I zoom out, because it's wide area large and that's fixed in the center, as I get further out, it just moves to the plants in front of it because they're closer and they're now in that zone. In terms of construction, this one is also fairly close to the Sony. This has 18 elements in 13 groups, whereas the Sony had 18 in 12 groups. The Nikon has 5 spherical elements and 3 ED elements. This lens also inherits the very special, that I can't pronounce it, Mesoaphorus lens coating that is actually only on 3 or 4 other lenses I can think of. The 400-2.8 TC, the 600 TC, the 135 Planner, and the new 35mm f1.2 was the first small lens to get it. This also has it, so I guess that's 5 in total. So that's meant to be their best and most expensive and latest generation coating to reduce flaring and ghosting. I have to say I haven't seen any of that today, but it is also very easy lighting conditions today. Okay, now something that didn't jump out at me in the press release, this lens actually has a really impressive closest focus. At 135, I'm able to focus at 60 centimeters. And keep in mind, that's not from the front of your lens, that's from back here at the sensor plane. So 60 centimeters from behind your lens mount, I'm focused on the front of this tree. And it's kind of hard to tell exactly, but again, for a lens that is measured in f-stops and technically a stills lens, this may actually be parfocal. What that means is will it hold focus as you zoom in and out. So having a look there, I've manually focused to nearest focus. So there you can see that's actually 0.57 centimeters or 57 centimeters or 0.57 meters. And then as I zoom out, it certainly looks like it's holding focus. My peaking is showing that on the back of camera. And going back in, we're still holding focus and the background goes super blurry. So, I mean, you'd have to test it in more situations, but it seems like it may actually be a parfocal lens, which for filmmakers is pretty great. Another thing that a lot of videographers care about, it is an issue for stills too, is focus breathing. So here at the wide end, you can see what my frame is. I'll just brighten it up a little. As I focus to infinity, you can see there is a little shift, just focus right on the edges. You see that play equipment, but it's basically right at closest. It feels like it kind of kicks into a semi-macro mode because it's just in that last little bit. So on the wide angle, I can focus down to 35 centimeters, but basically from 0.5 meter to infinity, it seems there's hardly any shift. At the long end, let's just, we'll position it so that we have that right in the top corner. Okay, and then again, there is a little shift, but it seems reasonably minimal. That's actually kind of hard to see. Let's do it on this scene. It's hard to tell because everything's so blurred out, but minimal. So there may be a little breathing, but it does seem to have very well controlled focus breathing and basically parfocal. So a win, and what you would hope for a not CINE lens. One thing, of course, this is all customizable, but it mentions that the zoom is a 360-degree rotation. As it comes out of the box, it's more like 180, gets you all the way through, and the same with the focus, it's not a 360, but that's going to be customizable. Have to say though, really the only thing that could go wrong with this is if the image quality was terrible or if these weren't responsive, but they're really responsive. It's like the paddle shifting on a Ferrari. It may not be the ideal way to do it, but if it works well, it works well. And overall, there's nothing to complain about with this lens. The size and weight, that kind of just is what it is, and it's par for the course for a lens like this. One thing to keep in mind though, a lens like this most likely is going to spend its life on a tripod or on a shoulder rig, and despite the heft of this, the size of it, it's almost the same weight as the new 35mm f1.2. I think without the foot, this is only 60 grams heavier than the 35mm prime. So putting things into perspective, for a stabilized, gigantic zoom with power zoom, and given Nikon standards these days, it's actually fairly light, I would have to say. To think about who this is for, obviously people who are like more serious filmmakers, it's fair to say that despite the specifications Nikon's been offering lately, there's still a lot more people shooting with Sony, Panasonic, RE, Red, that kind of thing for serious video work. There are, however, Nikon shooters out there, so this is going to appeal to them. But actually, it probably appeals to someone like me on productions where I have somebody at the tripod manning the camera. This kind of a lens could be really helpful for pulling focus. The reality is though, for me personally, I'm often either having Aaron using a gimbal like he is right now, and then I have the second and third camera on tripods not being manned, filming in 8K. So to be for those opportunities where I have dual cameramen, to have one person working this guy to be able to get those smoothest, butteriest shots. As I mentioned earlier, I'm heading to CP Plus in Japan at the end of this month. So hopefully we'll see a Z mount red at that time and be able to try this out some more. Please do let me know what questions you'd like me to ask the Nikon reps about the future of the Z system. Cheers, and I'll see you soon.